Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Hammerheads Show. I'm Jack Hammer from the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, and with me, as always, Mr. Rob Schuh from Left Shoe over on YouTube as well. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing very well, Jack. I was just thinking to myself, I'm so enamored with that opening that you have, the new video, and I'm saddened that if this drama plays out in the wrong way, you're going to have to change all of that again.
I mean, I know, right? That would be really unfortunate if
It
that
would be the
happens.
biggest tragedy of this entire situation.
I think you might be right. That might mean having to go hat in hand again to Jesse and be like, hey, I know we just did this like a week ago, but we need to do this again. Yeah, no, I really like the way that one turned out. So let's hope that it all works out.
Yes, yes.
But we're here. Crossed. We're here like everybody probably that's covering the 49ers right now, and it's a big story, not just here in the Bay Area, but it's a big story throughout the NFL. What is taking place with Deebo Samuel, the latest on Deebo Samuel, really breaking that whole situation down, because there's a lot of twists and turns on a regular basis to this thing. And so let's go ahead and just jump right into it. And the latest on Dibo, there's been all kinds of different rumors, like I mentioned. Do you feel, is it about the money?
This is an interesting one for me. If we're listening to the reports that have come out, you had Matt Mayoko talking this morning on KMBR saying, I don't know if this one's about the money. I don't think they even talked money. 49ers have been very cognizant not to give Dibo an offer that would be considered an insult. A very similar stance from Ian Rappaport on the Pat McAfee show. They seem to be indicating that it's not about the money. I'm not so sure about that. I tend to think perhaps it's not about the money in that's not what offended Dibo. Maybe it was something else. We don't really know. That's sort of the mystery shrouded in all of his secrecy. But where I believe it is about the money, I believe that there's an offer out there that if you make it to Deebo Samuel, whatever his other concerns are, they magically just drift away.
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. I heard the Mayoko piece as well. And it's funny because you've heard Mayoko say that recently. You also had Ian Rappaport talking about how they haven't, it's not a money issue, that Deebo just doesn't want to be in San Francisco. You saw, Adam Schefter try to blame this all on Deebo, saying that the 49ers want to give him the money. They want to give him a deal, and then at the same time, you have the 49ers saying that they haven't even offered him anything. So how are the 49ers like this whole thing is just quite odd. I think Adam Schefter's really shot himself in the foot so much this offseason. And that segment on ESPN where he's talking about, the 49ers can give him money. They've got a deal ready to give him. They haven't even offered it to him yet, according to two other sources. And I don't know if I really believe all that. I think the truth here lies somewhere in the middle. And I feel that whenever they say it's not about the money, it's about the money.
It's usually about the money, right? I mean, at some core level, I thought it was Coach Yak on Twitter summed it up very nicely in a tweet. But it was, ever since the trade demands for Deebo Samuel have come out, I've heard all these different things. Deebo doesn't want to be a running back anymore. Deebo wants to be closer to home. The Niners have put an offer on a table. The Niners have not made an offer, but they'll make one when they're ready. Deebo told the Niners, don't make an offer, just trade me. So it swivels back and forth as to what's real, what's out there, what we should believe at this point. Again, it may be true that Deebo doesn't want to play wide back, but he coined the term and he seemed pretty happy with it. 2-3 months ago, he's still selling merchandise marked up with the wide back. He seemed to embrace the role when it was leading to success on the field. I could definitely see him getting to a point of wanting to discuss reducing that role or eliminating that role. But to use that purely as the source to say, I'm out of San Francisco because they're going to use me as a wide back, the two things just don't jive with one another.
Yeah, no, they just don't. There was so much positivity throughout with everything that he said, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes for the team. I love all my teammates out here. We're like a band of brothers, is what he kept saying at the end of the year. Um, I'll do whatever Kyle asked me to do. That's what I'm going to do. So he was definitely leaning into all of that, even the wide back thing. Until I think, and the only reason I think that's even an issue is there's the report from Tony Pauline was that he spoke with a number of folks around the NFL, and that the 49ers had offered $19 million. And that sounds about right. That sounds to me like this is the guy. When I heard that he doesn't want to play running back, and it's about usage, and it's about location and all those things. For me, it's about money. And the reason I say it's about money is because they're offering him less money than he should get because of the way that they used him, and they're using it against him.
Yes. And that is unfortunate. That is a backhanded negotiation tactic. When you have a player going out of their way to do what's asked of them within the organization, and then you turn around and use that essentially favor that the player did to the organization to take his money down a peg, that I admit I would be upset about that as well. I don't know that I would have reacted in exactly the same fashion that Dibo did, but I would take that pretty personal with the way in which Dibo laid himself on the line week in and week out. He was so invested in that season. He was physically invested in that season, continually fighting through nagging injuries and things that you saw tangibly on the field that he was struggling through, and he kept pushing through it. I could see that rubbing him the wrong way when the team then turns around and said, yeah, that favor that you did for us, that's going to cost you some money.
Yeah, that's what it screamed to me when I heard that. And I think that's still an issue. The other thing that we've heard talked about was it was a clip from back. I think it was between the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl, where Deebo Samuel was talking to Matt Mayoko, and he talks about how he's willing to work with Trey Lance, but he doesn't want to do it in California. What do you make of that?
I mean, I tend to think that Dibo may not be overly thrilled with the vibe in California, so to speak. I don't think that it has much to do with, people talk about the game checks, and it's a valid concern. However, the jock tax is in place such that each game check is taxed in the state where the game is played. So really, the 49ers are only hindered with half of their games, plus the one in LA, right? Anything played in California is getting that California tax. But let's be honest, when you're making the type of money Dibo will be making on the next contract, you have accountants that are pretty creative in finding tax loopholes to get you out of paying most of that tax burden. Those of us that make more normal salaries pay far more tax than those who make millions and millions of dollars. It's just a weird scenario in this country. So I'm not convinced that that's what the issue is. When Dibo talks about not wanting to even train in California, clearly that is not anything to do with his game checks. He is not being paid during the offseason. So it has to be a preference around the actual portion of the country, the vibe that he gets, the people, the way in which he's treated or approached. It has to be something related to that. It can't be about the money in that instance.
Yeah, or maybe he just doesn't want to travel out. He's on the planes enough back and forth cross country to do what he needs to do in Santa Clara. He doesn't want to have to be traveling out to Southern California and spending his time down there working out with
could very well be
whatever. That could make sense too. And the other thing too, when it comes to working out with Trey Lance, and he says he needs to come out to the East Coast. I don't see that as being a big deal. Trey Lance last offseason, in between the workouts and everything, he was back out in Atlanta. That's where his quarterback coaches that he really worked out with in the run up to the draft, Quincy Avery and Sean McAvoy, they're out there in Atlanta. Last offseason, Trey Lance was there working at their facility along with Mohamed Sanu, who he ended up signing, playing with in 2021. So, if Deebo Samuel really wants to work out with Trey Lance and Trey Lance really wants to work out with Deebo Samuel, maybe they just meet in Georgia and get after it.
Yeah, that would make sense. The only issue that I have with Dibo, I mean, taking aside this entire trade drama, if we were just compartmentalizing Dibo saying, hey, I don't want to go out to Southern California to work with Trey, again, compartmentalizing the fact that he's requested a Trey, I would have slight issue with that, just in that this is Trey Lance attempting to take over the roster, to become one of the big leaders within the locker room for the San Francisco 49ers. if Dibo were assisting in that process, if he were attempting to become one of Trey Lance's bigger fans, like a follower, and to prop him up, to allow him to become that leader, then coming out to Southern California and practicing with Trey on his territory could lend itself to that. In demanding that Trey comes out to meet with Dibo, it sort of keeps Dibo as the larger presence within the locker room, which he is, granted. But I do think when you have a young quarterback, the hope would be to allow him to step into that leadership role, to allow him to be the face of the offense moving forward. I would have liked to have seen Dibo acquiesce in that way, but maybe he was already building up some of the frustration that's bubbled over in these contract talks.
Yeah, that could be part of it as well, and it's really interesting the whole way that this thing is playing out. And I will just answer this one comment from Swan, who says, yeah, but I think this offseason Trey is strictly working with QD 3D. That's the group down in Southern California. And he said, I'm not sure if he really works much with Avery's team anymore. I don't know. I know that Trey Lance was out here in Santa Clara working with Quincy Avery's team on one of their QB takeover ventures. They're going around the country. They were out in Santa Clara or in San Jose, the South Bay, just a couple weeks ago. And I know Trey Lance was there working with the kids. So I know there's some stuff going on between them, but it's here, and here's the deal. How much did Jimmy Garoppolo work out with Deebo Samuel?
Not much.
The one year they worked out together, Deebo Samuel broke his foot. So, maybe not working out together isn't the worst case scenario for the 49ers or for Deebo or for Trey Lance for all that matter.
Right. They had pretty good rapport, even without that offseason workout taking place. It did benefit the Niners having those two paired up. I will say, speaking of Jimmy Garoppolo, the Instagram post that Dibo then put out and said, "Solid, bro," to the quote of Jimmy Garoppolo, where he said, "Debo's earned every penny of it. Debo's a phenomenal teammate." It is interesting that in Dibo endorsing that comment, Dibo deserves his money. Dibo is going to get every cent regardless of where it plays out. That's sort of Dibo giving the thumbs up to it's about the money, right? There is a little bit of, hey, it's not about the money, but it's kind of about the money here.
It's about everything is about the money. It's all talk, but I keep saying that. I'm going to keep saying it, but so not wanting to play running back. Let me ask you something on that. If Deebo Samuel was to come to you and he was going to say, let's say he says, "Rob, I really want to come back to play for the 49ers, but I just don't like playing running back. I only want to play wide receiver." Are you cool with that?
I mean, yes and no. I'm okay with reducing his usage in that role. I like the idea of taking it down to where you're using it in critical game situations, critical games, the playoffs, hopefully a Super Bowl, right? If we're in the Super Bowl and Dibo comes to me, he's like, "Hey, I don't want to run any more of those," then we have a problem. But if it's over the regular season, I sort of agree that you would rather save his usage, save his body in that regard. I don't think I would have that big of an issue with it. I believe the Niners could do better in building out their running back room to remove that from Debo's role. And what you saw in the first half of the season before he started getting the carries was an equally impressive statistical performance. It wasn't resulting in the wins, but I don't know that you can directly attribute that to Deebo Samuel. I think I'd be okay with reducing the role.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, if you go back and you look at Deebo Samuel, he's just a very good football player. You can make him a full-time running back if you want to make him a full-time running back, and he'd be a very good running back. You can make him a full-time wide receiver, and he's proven that he'd be a really good wide receiver if that's all he did. His rookie season, he only had a handful of carries, 13 carries, I think, that season in 15 games or 14 games, whatever it was he played that year. This season, he only had 6 carries through the first 8 weeks of the season. I think that's really the sweet spot is, maybe 20 to 25 carries, tops, really allowing him just to play wide receiver. For me, I've said way too much about what I feel about Deebo Samuel, but the numbers speak for themselves. The numbers show you that he is a very good wide receiver, among the best in the NFL, if you just let him do it.
Right. Just let the man catch the ball.
Right. And that's going to, and that's, again, that's why it takes me back to the money. And it takes me back to, I believe that the offer for the 49ers was on the low side. Um, so, let me just go through here real quick before we move forward. Southside Tone says, thank you for the donation. Really appreciate it. Says, if Deebo just want to play wide receiver, shouldn't that turn off teams since they can't use him at that wide back as that wide back weapon? If trade to Jets, be ready to lose a lot. I mean, that's what we were just talking about, and I'll answer it. I don't think so. I think that if Deebo Samuel just wants to play wide receiver, Deebo Samuel this last season was on pace to put up over almost 1,900 yards during the regular season if he had played all 17 games. Based on the fact they played 16, if you look at his numbers over the first 8, he was going to be around 1766, which would have been the second highest in 49ers history. So Deebo Samuel's a hell of a wide receiver if you just give him the ball and let him play.
Right. I do think, I'm sure there would be some teams where they'd be disappointed to find out that Deebo wasn't open to that. And potentially it would raise some concerns about, how Deebo views his level of importance, like what type of a player, what type of a diva wide receiver Deebo might be. Sure, it could raise some red flags for teams in that regard, but I'm 100% on board with what you're saying here, Jack. Deebo is a top 10 wide receiver in the NFL or better, right? I mean, it is, you don't need to use him as a wide back in order to get the most out of Deebo Samuel. Does that add an element to his game? Yes, but he's a very capable wide receiver.
Absolutely. And Chris Royal kind of mentions that here. Thank you for your donation, Chris. He says 2 to 4 carries a game. And like you said, only in critical situations. And that's really the, down in the red zone or, second and 10 or whatever, midfield, so whatever, it's just here and there. If it's you get to that tight portion of a game and you need to make a play, that's when you go to Deebo. And in reality, when you look at the number of carries that Deebo Samuel got this year, that was born out of necessity. They just didn't have that explosive running back. Not having Raheem Mostert really hurt them. Elijah Mitchell had a good season, but he's not Deebo Samuel. He's not Raheem Mostert. He's not on that level in terms of a explosive carrier of the ball. And you can go back to week five in Arizona. Deebo Samuel scores a touchdown for the 49ers on a run around left end, gets to the end zone, touchdown. Elijah Mitchell gets around the left end, going to the same side of the field, and instead of getting to the end zone, he gets tackled at the 5-yard line because he stays inside, and the 49ers walk away with no points at the end of that. There's the difference between Deebo Samuel and Elijah Mitchell and everybody else that played running back for the 49ers, not named Raheem Mostert last year.
Right. Yeah. Speed, vision, ability to finish, running through tackles. It all is that much better with Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, absolutely. And see, I hate to disagree with Swan. I can't help it, but he says defenses cheating up is what hurt the running game the most. Disagree. What hurt the running game the most is not having the ability to be explosive to the edge and to really be explosive through the hole. Because when you look at the running game, when Deebo Samuel was getting the ball 80 times over the last 11 games, he was averaging over 6 yards a carry.
Right.
The rest of the running game was averaging under 4 yards at 3.8. That's not it's not like when Deebo Samuel was in the backfield, the defense didn't know what was coming. They knew it was coming. When Deebo Samuel lines up in the backfield, everybody's eyes on the defense.
Yeah, they're keyed on Deebo.
Wherever Deebo Samuel goes in the field, they know where the ball's going. Right? Or they're pretty keyed on it. And that's why using Samuel in that role in some ways opens up other things for the 49ers and why he has some value there. So it's definitely going to be fun to see how this plays out over the off season. I sure hope he stays. I think it's the best move for the 49ers. And let's get into that one a little bit. Louis Riddick came out with a tweet yesterday, and his question was really, how did we get here? And how did we get here so fast? What was your take on that?
In reading out that tweet, so Louis Riddick, his tweet was this: Deebo set the tone for the 49ers in every way that a team leader sets the tone for a team. Production, explosive clutch playmaking, toughness. It was Deebo that did it. Everyone there knows it, admitted it. What happened in this relationship? What a disappointing situation. I thought that summed it up so nicely. That how did we get from a point where Dibo would glowingly talk about his relationship with Kyle Shanahan, reference the ability to walk by his office, stop in, have a football conversation, two grown men talking. When speaking about San Francisco, not a word of discontent, no talk about, I don't like playing in San Francisco, I don't like my role as a wide back. None of that existed. And then a few short months later, here we are with what appears to be a concrete demand for a trade, and two sides diametrically opposed to one another in some key ways in this negotiation. I get that we don't have all of the inside info, but it's just tough for me to even come up with reasonable scenarios that would have resulted in this end result of Dibo being this level of upset. I mean, it really, it's the level of upset that you get when someone personally insults you or your family. I mean, he seems to be genuinely pissed, and maybe it's an act. Maybe he's using his leverage. Maybe he's just trying to rile up the fan base. If that's the case, he's a genius because it has worked. But I don't get the sense that it is an act. I get the sense that he is genuinely upset over something. We may never know what that is. I think we will. I think we'll get a tell-all book at some point. Someone's dying to write about the Shanahan era in San Francisco, especially if it leads to championships or a colossal failure at some point. Someone will write that book. But until then, we've got to speculate. And honestly, I just struggle to come up with what in the world could have happened to get us from where we were at the end of the season to where we are now.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, it was funny because the other day, it was a couple of days ago where Deebo Samuel took to, I think it was Instagram, and he talked about how nobody knows about what's going on other than the 49ers, me and my agent.
Right.
Basically calling out all the reports that he had requested a trade and all those kind of things, even though he had liked some stuff. And I saw that, and come to find out, Deebo Samuel's DMs are open on Twitter. I don't know if you noticed that. So I sent Dibo a message and I said, "Hey, Dibo, I would love to get your side of the story. Hit me up." So if Dibo wants to reach out and respond and tell me what it is that it caused the issues and what's going on right here, I'd be more than glad to tell his side of the story.
Yes, the actual truth about it, direct from the source. Dibo, that is a fantastic idea at this point.
But because the hard part with this whole thing is that when the social media stuff that he's putting out there is so spotty and cryptic, and puts it up, pulls it down, and it's not really ever sure exactly what's going on in his head. And maybe that's what he wants. Maybe he doesn't want anybody to know what's going on. And that leads us all back to, how did we get here? And like you're saying, it was, things were all so good. And I just have to believe it's the money. If you throw out an offer of $19 million to a wide receiver when the going rate is in the range of what is it, 25 to 30 million for the top 4 or 5 guys, and here's the guy who put up top 4 or 5 numbers last year, and you're offering him just about what Christian Kirk received. I mean, come on now.
Yeah, that's insulting. That is very insulting. I thought that Akash had a good tweet as well, summing this up, saying, "I still think Deebo Samuel's gripes with the 49ers have to do with guaranteed money and less to do with his usage. If the 49ers were willing to guarantee him 3+ seasons, I'd imagine he'd be interested in playing the wide back role again." To me, it comes down to that. He may be genuinely upset, genuinely hurt about the offer that was presented to him, whether, we're getting into semantics here, but whether it was offered, whether it was hinted at, whether they talked about terms, whatever it is, we understand that there was no formal offer that was given, but it's fair to assume that numbers were discussed at some point. You would think that would be the case. That's a reasonable assumption to make. If you got back to the point where you're wowing Deebo's camp with money, I just believe most of these concerns fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that if the numbers were in line with where they're supposed to be, we're not having this argument, this discussion. And I took to 49ers.pressdemocrat.com yesterday with my solution to the 49ers. All this can go away if you just give them the right offer.
Right.
And right now the top offer was $30 million. I don't have a problem with giving this guy $30 million. I really don't. I know people don't think of him in the way that I do, but I think Deebo Samuel is a fantastic wide receiver, among the top 5 in the league. I know he had some drop issues at the beginning of this year. I've heard comments about him possibly not being able to catch the fastball of Trey Lance. I don't know. I saw him make a pretty darn good catch on a fastball by Trey Lance against Arizona there in Week 5.
Yeah,
I saw him take 240-yard, two deep balls from Trey Lance to the house. One against Seattle, and then the one against Houston. I don't know. I think that this is a guy who makes a lot of sense for the 49ers, and give him 5 years, $150 million. I think it was like $62.5 million or something like that, fully guaranteed, which is more guaranteed than, although the average annual value is the same, it's a higher guarantee than any wide receiver on the market. I think the overall guarantees was somewhere around $72.5 million, which is a little over what Hill got out of Miami. And it's the perfect deal in that after year 3, the 49ers can move on. And the cap hit gets to the point after year 3 going into year 4 where the dead cap is only $10.5 million, and at that point they can move off of them and save a bunch of money if need be. And if the guy's really doing well, you can also restructure him at that point. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that you can go based on the way that I structured that contract for him. So, hit me up, Dibo. Again, hit me up in the DMs. I got a great contract offer for you that you should probably, maybe give to the 49ers and see if they'll give it to you. That works for both sides, because the whole key there is they need to move off of Jimmy Garoppolo.
I think we can make the promise here and now, Dibo, that Jack and I will work very hard to sell that contract offer to the faithful, get them bought in, and then that crowdsourcing will attack the 49ers and get them to embrace said contract.
That there you go. There you go. And then, Swan throws out, he says, I don't remember a Deebo drop where it cost the 49ers a game. Okay. I kind of do. It wasn't a drop. It was a catch and fumble on a rainy night at Levi Stadium, end of the first half. The 49ers are clinging to like a 6-point lead or something like that. Catches the ball and kind of deep in their own end, catches it, gets hit, ball comes out. Indianapolis takes the lead. They go on to win the game. But that happens at times to everybody. But there are some bad things. I can't speak in glowing terms about Deebo Samuel and then also ignore the fact that throughout the majority of last season, especially in the beginning of the year, I was regularly updating the Deebo drop chart as the over the first half of the season, because it was an issue.
Yeah, right.
There were some big drops at times, so that's a part of it as well. Jay Bio says, thank you for the donation, Jay. Really appreciate it. It says, Jack and Rob, do you think the Deebo situation will affect how the Niners set up their big board? Would they get running back like Strong, who runs a 4.340, and Jones for speed? I'm not sure who Jones is, but
I'm thinking that's Marcus Jones, the nickelback, but
okay,
that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense as far as running backs.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one, but here's what I'll say to that, Jay, is that regardless of whether Deebo Samuel comes back or not, they should have a running back like Strong or Jerome Ford or Brian Robinson from Alabama, or Ty Chandler from North Carolina. They should have a running back or 2 or 3 on their board, and not be afraid of the running back position, and the lack of explosiveness out of the running back position last season is why you saw Deebo Samuel have to get 80 carries over the last 11 weeks of the season.
Yeah. To me, you have to adjust the big board in some way to acknowledge that you're going to have a gaping hole at wide receiver. I know we're going to talk about the 49ers receiving room with and without Deebo Samuel in a little bit as one of our topics, but I do think you have to pivot and replace that need at wide receiver, as well as addressing it in the running back room. I would love it if the 49ers did both, regardless of whether Dibo is on the roster or not. I think it is warranted to grab a wide receiver within this draft and to look at improving the running back room as well. I would just say that the biggest piece for me is the 49ers, it would seem by all accounts, basically avoided looking at many of the first round talents with the idea that they had no intention of being in the first round. So it's fair to wonder what level of due diligence they did on first round wide receivers and running backs with the expectation they would not be selecting there.
Yeah, the only first round wide receiver that, and I don't even know if it's been reported that they were there to really see this guy or not, but it would be the wide receiver out of USC, because they were at USC's pro day. Drake
Right.
London.
Drake London.
That's the only first round wide receiver that I know, for sure that they were at his pro day at least. And the 49ers, I think, were probably at most pro days for these bigger programs, right? So I'm sure they've had interactions at some point with pretty much every school, especially at the top level, that they would be expecting to bring somebody in from.
And, I was referencing more specifically the 30 formal visits that they're allowed. Only about 15 of those have been reported, according to Matt Barrows in his mailbag article today. And in that, he referenced the idea that many of those other 15 are he can't actually figure them out, that he has reached out to sources and actually did come across an agent who said, yeah, the 49ers did have a formal interview with one of my players, but they've asked me not to say anything or say who it was. So there's a little bit of mystery surrounding it. You could imagine the 49ers doing that if they, had notice of Deebo's trade request, which the report is that they have for over a week now, that they may have used that to keep under wraps, but start talking to wide receivers. Or if they know that Alex Mack is going to be retiring, they may keep those interviews under wraps so that no one knows whether they're going interior offensive line or wide receiver first. So it's possible they've had some of those formal interviews with the first round wide receivers, but you would think they've done less due diligence this year than they would have in other seasons with a first round draft pick.
Right. I think that they're going to get, I'm pretty sure that they would have 30 visits, and it makes sense that those names aren't just, thrown out there because they don't want to necessarily, it's pretty easy to, in years when the team has a first round draft pick, you can kind of start to get an idea of the guys that they've seen. And usually those visits give you an idea of who they're really interested in. And it's helped me with some of my mock drafts in the past. So I could see why the 49ers maybe don't want to have that information out. And I mean, you hit on a good topic right there I'm pretty sure that Alex Mack's going to move on. And so there's all kinds of speculation as to what happens, but I think Alex Mack is going to not be back with the 49ers. He's passing up $100 million to not show up for workouts.
That is crazy. And it's also interesting that he just signed up for a new role this season within the NFLPA. That was an interesting tidbit that came out in one of the articles I read recently. I think it's like a treasurer's role or something like that, but literally just took the assignment recently. And so the individual who was talking about that in the article speculated at the time, well, that's an indication that he's coming back. Now it may seem that he took that role, even though he's not planning to actively be playing in the NFL, but he may still be an active member of the NFLPA.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The center position, regardless, is one that has pretty good depth throughout this draft. You don't have to get one, unless you're getting one, unless you're able to get Linderbaum in the top 20. He's probably going to be gone around by 25. If you don't have a first round pick in there, you're looking at probably the best spot to get a center being from 93 on. So, that's why we're not seeing all those names out there so much for that position.
And JC Tretter is still out there as a free agent. I mean, the Niners like to do that sort of Band-Aid where they fill the role outside of the draft. That wouldn't be a Band-Aid. That would be a very clear solution at center if you went with JC Tretter. But it would give them the option to go through the draft if he's still available throughout the draft. If they miss, if the board doesn't fall in the way that they wanted to, backup plan could be to pay bigger money to JC Tretter.
Yeah, I think you're right. That could be another option as well. They got to move Jimmy Garoppolo. They've got to get Jimmy Garoppolo off of the roster. Then we'll talk about that just here in a minute. LA Blue 49. Thank you very much for the donation on the super chat, $5. He says, every great player always wants the ball in his hands. I'll say it doesn't matter how I get it, just give me the ball. And Deebo only wants it as a receiver. Yes, that is the question. That's why I don't believe that I don't believe that Deebo's issue is with being a running back. I think Deebo's issue is with the contract offer that he's getting from the 49ers, who are trying to lowball him because of the way that they chose to use him this last season.
Yeah, he doesn't mind being a running back. He minds being paid as a running back.
That's right, because there is a big gap in the NFL between what a running back gets paid and what a wide receiver gets paid. And if
it's enormous right now after these new contracts for the wide receivers.
Yeah, it's been a big jump, right? And it's about the money, folks. You can hear all the things that you want. And, I did see the tweet earlier. I can't remember who it was, but not the tweet, but the comment over here, they told me that Deebo blocked me, probably because I'm talking about him. Deebo didn't block me. Deebo likes me. Deebo likes me. Look at this face. Who cannot? How would he block this? Not want to see this come pop up on his Twitter?
So likable.
Yeah. So definitely there. And then let me just take a look really quick. I know, if in fact the 49ers decide that this just is not going to work out, and they decide to move on from him, what do you think would be his potential trade value for Deebo Samuel? Let's start there, and then we'll get into the destinations after that.
I was interested to break down the two trades that seem most relevant to this conversation. If you're trying to assess Deebo Samuel's trade value, it's very easy to look at two pretty similar trades that just took place in Davante Adams going to the Las Vegas Raiders, and obviously the Tyreek Hill trade in going down to Miami. And when you look at those on the surface level, you might think that, oh, well, Miami gave up a ton to get Tyreek Hill. They gave up 5 draft picks, so it looks like a king's ransom. And it does have that outward appearance. You got a 1 and a 2 for Davante, and you got a 1, 2, 4, plus a 4 and a 6 next year for Tyreek Hill. But when you actually break it down, regardless of whether you use the Jimmy Johnson model for trade value or the Rich Hill model for trade value that's a little more updated and a newer version, they come out to approximately the same, actually leaning in favor of the Davante Adams trade because those first-round picks are so valuable. And the Davante Adams trade was for a 22 and 53, whereas Tyreek was 29, 50, and 121 with next year's picks, the 4 and the 6, to be undecided because, you got to figure out what Miami's record is at the end of the year. But It basically gets you to the equivalent of trading the 13th overall pick when you look at it from the Jimmy Johnson model. Both of those trades are very close to the value of the 13th overall pick. If you go with the Rich Hill trade value chart, it gets you closer to the 11th overall pick. So that's what was had for those two. I see it as a very similar situation for Deebo Samuel. I think that's the target, the trade value equivalent of around the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th pick in the draft. I believe the Niners would rather have multiple picks. I think they want it to look more like the Tyreek Hill trade, where it appears to be a king's ransom, even if it's slightly less in true trade value.
Yeah, I hear it. And I really got to go with what Joey over here says. Joey says, Jack, for Deebo, I use the Herschel Walker trade value chart, period. I agree. If we're trading Deebo Samuel, it's like I told Jesse and Jordan Elliott and I believe it was David on Twitter last night. I said, hey, if I'm trading and I'm got to trade Deebo Samuel, you're giving me 4, you're giving me 10, you're giving me 35, you're giving me 38, and throw in 69 as well. That's a nice one. And then Jesse asked me about what about a first next year, and I said, well, yeah, throw one of those in too.
Yes, so, I'll take that as well.
No, but realistic, when you start to talk about this with 49er fans and even myself, I wasn't being serious, obviously, with that.
Right.
I think realistically, the it's probably going to be 35 and 38 you could get for Deebo Samuel. Maybe like 35, 38. You might even be able to get 60. I think it was 69. If you give them 61 as well, so you'd be at a couple early seconds and then a just fall back a little bit there. It's going to be, it would be a nice haul. I think when you look at the trade value chart, if the 34 and 38, you get those two, or you can get 10. 10's kind of a cool one too, because then you can start trading back multiple times and pick up a
Right.
bunch of picks that way too, if that's what you want to do. That's what Bill Walsh did, right? When he had the great draft of 86, he traded back out of the first round, multiple trades back, and finally decided to make a pick there early in the second, and he had the best dang draft in the history of the 49ers. So,
I'm telling you, my favorite players fall in the second, third, and early fourth round in this draft. There are people I would love to have from the first, but I basically ignored that with the assumption the Niners would not waste draft capital to trade back up into the first. I could fill out one hell of a mock draft if we got ourselves a couple of extra seconds and maybe a third to add to what we already have.
Yeah, and while we're talking about potential trades and all those kind of things, did you hear about the potential trade that ESPN threw out today, where you trade Jimmy Garoppolo and pick 61, I think it was, to the Steelers in return for their first round draft pick, which is in the late in the 20s. Did you see that?
I did not, but that would be fantastic.
Yeah, that was, and I was asked that on the show that I was doing before I came on here with Larry Krueger. He had seen it. I'd heard a little bit about it, but I didn't see all the details of it. But the way that he explained it, I mean, that's a heck of a deal for the 49ers. If you could trade Jimmy Garoppolo trade Jimmy Garoppolo and give him Jimmy Garoppolo, give him 61, get that first round pick back, pay $7 million of Jimmy Garoppolo's deal or something like that for him to go out to Pittsburgh. That's a great deal for the 49ers to get that pick at 20. I think it's 20. And then on top of that, the bonus that you get is, that's a good deal for Pittsburgh in a way, because they get a quarterback who they probably fits their system really well.
Right.
But they also have a quarterback already in place that they didn't give a whole lot of money to, that can hold down the fort until Garoppolo is fully healthy during training camp, and they don't have to rush him back, to play week one of preseason.
I feel like we got to get the Steelers on the line and get this deal done, Jack.
I'm with you. That was probably one of my favorite ones that I've heard, because it was also pretty. It seemed like it made sense for both sides too. And usually,
right, it wasn't out of nowhere. There was some substance to it. It's something that you could see actually being agreed to.
Yeah, because most of the time when you do these trade scenarios, it's overly lopsided one way or the other.
Right.
LA Blue jumping back in. Thank you again for the donation. He says, trade Dibo to the Jets for number 10, swap out 61 for their number 38 this year, and a second and third for next year. I don't know if they can get the second and third next year. If you give them, send out Dibo for it depends on what you're doing. I think even getting 10 and 38 for Dibo and 61 is might be a little bit of a stretch.
That's a strong trade in and of itself. Just to get those terms back without the second and the third from next year, value-wise, that would be a phenomenal trade that would dwarf the trade that just happened for both of the other superstar wide receivers.
Yeah, I think that would be a good one for the Niners if they can get 10. That's an interesting one.
Do you think? Because 35 and 38 is great value. It doesn't sound like it, but it really is, especially if you throw in 69 with that as well from the Jets. So that would be a package coming from the Jets. Do you think, though, Jack, that the Niners could, from a PR perspective, can they sell that as being a good deal to the fan base without having a number one in there? Will fans balk at it, even though the value is potentially higher than some of the other trade scenarios out there that would involve a number one pick?
Yeah, the 49ers could trade the 49ers can talk their fans into pretty much anything. I mean, that's one of the things that I've noticed over the last couple of years, and especially this last year. There's the 49. Just look at Twitter as an example. I don't know. I don't know how much that really represents the fan base, but at least the fans that I interact with on Twitter, and even over at the Press Democrat in the comment section there. If the 49ers can get a king's ransom for Deebo Samuel, or even get 35 and 38, there's people out there that are completely fine with it, because they feel like there's no way you can pay Deebo Samuel the type of money that he's asking for potentially,
right,
and keep this team together, which again just isn't isn't really the case. But I can see, and I'm not trying to downplay anybody,
No.
but fans have a way of talking themselves into so many things, and
Yes.
I've heard I've read so many things about Deebo Samuel over the last couple of weeks, which is wild.
It is very wild. And I think that, many people put the team above any one individual player. And so they will then find a narrative that allows them to keep the team in its more pristine state and say goodbye to a player, even if it's someone like Deebo Samuel that they may have cheered for with, every bit of their being in the prior season.
Yeah, yeah, and Debo knows that too, and I think that's
He
partly
does.
why, with all the stuff that's been going on Twitter, he's just kind of like, yeah, you guys will be mad at me for now, but if I come back and I'm playing in the red and gold, you'll be cheering me on. As
It's
soon as
amazing how quickly that'll all get swept under the rug. The team will act like everything was fine. Deebo will act like everything was fine. And the fan base will be buying Deebo jerseys again.
oh yeah, if Debo Samuel ends up in San Francisco, anybody that you've heard of that's been angry, if they're at Levi Stadium week 1, if that's where the 49ers play, and he scores a touchdown, imagine the 49ers get the ball, fifth play of the game, Trey Lance draws back, hits Debo Samuel deep down the middle of the field on a post for a touchdown. There's not going to be a person that sits on their hands because it was Deebo Samuel scoring a touchdown. They'll be up
No.
and screaming and yelling. And the 49ers know this. And this is why the NFL is the way that it is and why owners have it over the players. And that's why they're able to do what they do to them.
Yeah, why they're all billionaires and their bank accounts continue to grow at a rapid pace.
Yes, they're like Scrooge McDuck, right? They fall at the end of the day. They just fall back on their bed full of money.
That's right, swimming in their gold coins.
Richie, thank you for the donation. He says, when do the 49ers stop negotiations with Deebo and focus on getting the best deal for him? They can miss the boat again like they did with Jimmy G. I'll let you take this one first. I have an idea.
I would assume that the 49ers are actively taking calls right now. It has already been reported that there's been interest from the Packers, Jets, and Lions. I would guess that there are even more teams that have called. And I would assume, I don't have definitive proof, but it would seem very reasonable to assume that John Lynch is picking up the phone and having those dialogues while at the same time trying to decide if the contract is savable. It sounded as if the two sides may have never had a concrete offer in place, but it seemed, we're talking at a bare minimum, it sounds as if right now they are apart, that they have ceased negotiations for the moment. So my take would be that they are very much focused on hearing those trade offers and considering right now, do we believe we can get a deal done with Deebo? If not, we must trade him. Who's the best available offer out there? But they may be saying to themselves, we don't know if we can get a deal done with Deebo. And in that instance, they need to both field the offers and continue to have conversations with Deebo's camp.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna know their feelings on this situation by this time next week. I think the second
Day 2 of the draft, we will know for sure.
I think the second round of the draft would have started by this point in the day next week. And if Deebo Samuel is still a member of the 49ers after next Friday, that tells me that the 49ers are feeling like they can get something done with him.
I agree.
Yeah. Either they can get something done with them or they've already got a trade in the works for somebody else that's been drafted by another team.
Right. For a player. Yeah, that would make sense.
G.I. Jones. Thank you very much, G.I. He says, $4.99. He says, did Deebo get cragged by Parag? I said it before and I'll say it again. Niners will go sub 500. Did he get cragged by Parag? I'm not sure. Do you know what that means?
I'm assuming that he's talking about Roger Craig getting shafted at some point along the road, but I'm not familiar with any Roger Craig contract holdouts or stories. And so I can't say that definitively. I have to disagree on the Niners going sub 500 with or without Deebo. I believe this team is deep enough to be a 9-8 team with or without Deebo. I think they can compete for a playoff spot. It is a deep roster, a talented defense. And if Trey Lance is who I hope he is, that's going to be the biggest change of this offseason. Nothing else is going to come close to what you could get out of the offense with a Trey Lance version as opposed to what we were getting with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Okay, so let's just take what you just said. If the 49ers move off of Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, I think is going to have a big year, whether Deebo Samuel's here or not. I think he's going to
I
mesh
agree.
well with.
I'm predicting a 1,000-yard season. I'm buying low in fantasy football with Brandon Ayuk.
Okay. So do you think? Oh, real quick, Gi comes back and he says it's a movie reference from Friday. Do you know what that is? Craig.
Oh, Craig is Ice Cube in Friday, right? So what happens to Craig? Wait, go back to the initial super chat to see if he got Craiged, which would be get Craiged by Parag. Fired on his day off, maybe? That has got to be what it is.
Right? That's what it is.
Fired on his day off.
Did Deebo get fired on his day off by Parag? That's what. Man.
That's a good reference, G.I. Jones. It took a minute, but that's a quality reference right there.
That is. That's actually really good. And he might have gotten fired on his day off. We don't know. We'll find out.
I love how he gave us a teaser, but didn't spoil the answer. He still needed us to guess it with the second teaser. I'm a fan.
Yeah, and that's funny. Totally had me going, and then Lee responds, "Bye, Felicia." They're pretty funny story around that one too. Let's save that one for another day. You're kind of mentioning the receiver room without Deebo Samuel. You kind of already transitioned onto this one without me, but and you said Brandon Ayuk, you feel like he's going to be over 1,000 yards. I agree with you. I think that's the potential there. But who becomes the other? Who becomes let's just say Brandon Ayuk becomes Deebo Samuel. So who becomes the Brandon Ayuk to the Brandon Ayuk?
I see it. Yeah, I see it as a combination of factors needing to happen in order for the 49ers to stay above 500 without Deebo Samuel. And so to me, that is a combination of Brandon Ayuk having a resurgence as a receiver, having a greater than 1,000-yard receiving season, and the reemergence of George Kittle. I think that you have him come back to more of a receiving threat than what you saw last year. You could have another 1,000-yard receiving season for George Kittle, but you're going to need to add to that room. I think if you're losing Deebo Samuel, you're going to have to adjust that big board. You are going to have to throw those wide receivers up above some of the other position groups and reach a little bit. Hopefully the board falls in a way that you take who you want, when you want, but I would prioritize wide receiver because you are going to need to get some production out of the rest of the room. And I'm not entirely confident that Juwan Jennings is entirely that guy. I think he can continue to do what he did last year and maybe improve on that. I don't know that I expect a huge leap in production. I would expect Ray McLeod to have some production from that group, but the rest of it, I'm not seeing much. And so I do think you have to add somebody through the draft or potentially free agency.
I think the receiver room, as a whole, if you have Deebo Samuel on this roster, is better than it was last year. They're better throughout the roster, but he's just such a big piece of what they do. Without Deebo, I'm not sure. I think there's I think that they fall down a little bit.
I certainly agree with that. You would have to address it in some way. And there's not a huge number of options in free agency. People continue to, list Julio, but I just don't think that he's giving you all that much production based on what I saw last year.
Well, and Julio Jones would be, I think, a nice add. But I don't, Julio Jones to me would be a nice add if you're expecting him to be your number 3, kind of like Randy Moss in 2012 was for the 49ers that year. And CJ coming in here, Dibo, you got knocked the F out, man. There's your Craig reference from the earlier super chat that you and I both screwed up on.
Yeah, right.
So that's what we were missing. I apologize, G.I. Jones. That was a good one. Even the getting fired on your day off, that was a good one too. Sorry, we're off on that. Don't leave us yet. Keep coming back. Bring us some more movie references.
That's right. Confirm for us what you were referring to.
Yeah, we'll figure that out eventually. Julio washed. That's an interesting one to say there, Lee. I understand the thought process behind that, but if you go back and you look at the numbers for Julio Jones and the numbers for Randy Moss back in the day, very similar trajectories towards the end of their year, the end of their career. And Randy Moss was able to pick it up and do good in his role as the number 3 with the 49ers. And I think that you could say the same thing with Julio if he's your third guy. You don't want Julio to come in and be number 2.
Yeah, I'd agree. Nacho Serra comes in to point out that Jarvis Landry is still available. I saw multiple stories linking him to teams. I just assumed he had been taken off the market, but just looking at it right now, there's still a story out today. Jarvis Landry deciding between the Browns and the New Orleans Saints. You would think if the Niners knew they were going to be out on Deebo Samuel, that could be a receiver you would consider bringing in. I would not call Julio Jones washed. I think it's fair to say that he's on the other side of his career and that he's on that downward slope, and it's fair to wonder what he has left in the tank. I don't wonder what Jarvis Landry has in the tank. He is Mr. Consistent as far as being able to produce catches and yards on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and it kind of shows, if the runners aren't in on some of these top guys, I think it comes back to kind of show you where the Niners are on this whole process,
right?
Where their feelings are. And then before we move on real quick, Gary, thanks, Gary. That's a good one. He says hit that like button, and that's something that I don't do enough of. So like it says across, like Gary says down here on the bottom, or it says across the top, hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel, and hit that little bell notification so you always know when we're going live. Kind of moving off of, the whole thing, the potential trade destination, the potential trade numbers, but what would be a potential trade destination? Where do you think he's going to go? Do you think, the names that we've heard, Packers, Jets, and Lions, do you really think the Packers are going to trade for Deebo? The 49ers are going to trade Deebo Samuel to Green Bay?
I don't buy into either the Packers or the Chiefs. That one just doesn't make sense to me. To take someone that send them out, and then bring in someone that you don't, that isn't familiar with your system, and pay them the bag of money. So the Packers one doesn't work for me on either side. I don't believe that the 49ers, who were not willing to send LaFleur to go coach with his brother, are now all of a sudden going to send Dibo to go play for the Packers. So I don't believe that the Niners would want to ship him out there. And I don't believe that the Packers would move on from Devontae Adams only to bring in another wide receiver and pay them accordingly. The Chiefs, I could see the 49ers being okay with that trade. But again, I just struggle with the team that just shipped out their own player that was highly capable, bringing in another one that they don't know. So the Jets and the Lions both seem viable. I have the Jets as one of the, if not the most likely landing spots because of the flexibility that they have with so many draft picks, the connection with Robert Saleh and LaFleur, obviously, and the need for a wide receiver to pair with their young quarterback. They are, you could say, still in, I don't know if you could say, or whether it just is a fact that they're still in rebuild mode and have been for forever. But at some point, the Jets need to make a splash. So in the New York market, they're the type of rebuilding team that could, in fact, go out and make a big move like this to try and propel themselves back to relevance. I would say that I have them at the top of my list.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like on the Packers deal, I don't see the Packers being a trade destination unless you're getting Aaron Rodgers back in return. Maybe you do that.
Yeah.
Let him go out and play with Jordan Love, but no,
bring back Rodgers.
Yeah, I don't see it. And I think the most likely location for Deebo Samuel here in 2022 is going to be right back in Santa Clara where he already is. Well, actually, he's not in Santa Clara. He's out somewhere on the East Coast. But
yeah, right. I actually agree with that. I would do greater than 50% chance that he's back with the Niners, but I'm a lot closer to 50% than I was even just a few days ago. I've thrown out other teams that seem like sort of out of left field, but you could see one with every one of them. The Colts, the pairing with Matt Ryan could be nice. He was throwing to a lighter version of Deebo Samuel last year with the Falcons. The Falcons themselves could be a potential landing spot, maybe trying to, pair up a couple of players to send them over there. The New England Patriots, there's a lot of similarity between Mac Jones and his ability versus Jimmy Garoppolo, and that was a successful pairing with Deebo Samuel. And the Philadelphia Eagles are one that can't be discounted because they have a quarterback on a rookie deal and they have a lot of draft capital. Even though they're in the conference, I don't think the 49ers would view them in the same way they would the Packers.
Yeah, I agree with that because they're just not at the same level of challenging the 49ers.
Right.
Yeah, and then um, kind of touch a little bit on Jimmy Garoppolo earlier, but I think we should go back to him. There's been some news around Jimmy Garoppolo. He's been kind of doing the interview circuit this week. Uh, he was on with Adam Shine. I believe that was yesterday. I think he did. I know he did an interview with Sports Illustrated as well. Uh, we know that he's according to Jimmy, he's working his way back. His shoulder, is still an issue. He's not able to throw, but he's only 6 weeks removed from that surgery, and he's trying to get back in shape. And he's not sure when that next goal is going to be crossed. But kind of, what do you think's happening with Jimmy Garoppolo? What do you think's going to go on there?
I've heard some suggestions around, hey, well, this news of Jimmy now making some circuits and doing some interviews. Is Jimmy attempting to press the screws to the 49ers, tighten the screws on the 49ers to get to the point where he can be released? And quite honestly, it was pretty powerful logic as to why Jimmy Garoppolo would want to be released, as opposed to what appears to be the 49ers strategy of holding on to him until his value is somehow resurrected, whether that is through injury or a team missing in the draft or whatever set of circumstances may play out such that demand for Jimmy Garoppolo would rise again. You could see Jimmy and his camp wanting to control their own narrative. If the 49ers take that hardline approach and nothing happens, every team gets who they want in the draft, nobody's injured during preseason, you could have a scenario where we get very close to week one. Finally, the 49ers say to themselves, all right, we can't trade him. We're going to have to cut him. And Jimmy is left in a situation where he has zero guaranteed money because he's completely healed from his surgery. He's now been released. Every team's roster is completely full. And he's sort of stuck in between a rock and a hard spot on that scenario. I believe that logic is sound. I'm not sure I go so far as to believe that Jimmy is actively trying to get himself released. When I saw the interview in question on Yahoo, it was a question asked of him around, having been removed from how far he was away from surgery, how close he was to throwing. I didn't interpret that as any ill intent on his part. I firmly believe that when he chose to get the surgery, he was not thinking about the best interests of the 49ers. He was thinking about his own best interest, but I don't really fault him for that.
Yeah, and I think he's going to end up getting moved. He's going to end up getting moved. He's not going to be with the 49ers once training camp hits. I think he's going to get moved earlier than that. I think right now for the 49ers, they're sitting there with their both fingers crossed, hoping that Carolina takes a position other than quarterback at number 6, because now that becomes the destination for them, that they might even be able to get him moved, on before day 2 of the draft. Because the Carolina doesn't even have a pick until day 3. So, I think that's where you see the movement though with Garoppolo, is if they take a position, another position, hopefully able to see him end up somewhere else. But they need to move on from him, because all this talk about Deebo Samuel that we're discussing and these contracts and everything else, they can't even sign Deebo Samuel right now.
It is tight. I mean, I would take the stance that they could, in that they could extend Jimmy Ward, but it doesn't seem that they're willing to do that.
Jimmy Ward, Emmanuel Mosley. There's ways that they could get around it if they wanted to, obviously. But as of right now, without making any other moves, if the 49ers were to give Deebo Samuel even the vet minimum and a signing bonus, which is of $19 million, which is lower than the top 5 that have been given out so far this year to wide receivers, they're still over the cap at this point, because they're only $722 million underneath it at this point. All this talk that's out there about how the 49ers can get Deebo Samuel back and not increase his cap hit, that was all accurate based on the salary, a signing bonus in the range of about $12 million, $13 million, about what we saw last year from Fred Warner. What was kind of in that, but the wide receiver market has changed so much over the last couple of months that that's no longer the case. And I think people need to change the way that they're viewing the situation, because it has changed.
Right. It definitely has changed. The market has changed.
Yeah, it has. And I was one of the ones that was saying it wasn't a big deal in the beginning. But that's changed, and that's why I've changed my stance on it as well. As far as Jimmy Garoppolo and Deebo Samuel go, Could they maybe be sent off as a package deal?
I love that Power Fitness just minutes ago put this in as a suggestion. It was reading our minds, Jack. Send Dibo and Jimmy as a package deal. You got to get creative. You're attempting to potentially try and move both of these players. Certainly, you're trying to move Jimmy Garoppolo. You're exploring trade destinations for Deebo Samuel. Is it more palatable for teams or is it less palatable for teams? It's probably a case-by-case scenario, but there are teams out there where it seems like both a fit and the cap space is there. The teams with the most cap space where it also could be a fit at the quarterback position, Texans, Panthers, and Jets are all in the top 5. The Jets, obviously, that's a questionable one with the rookie quarterback there last year, but the Lions are there at number 7. So you could see Texans, Panthers, Lions being the 3 most likely out of those where you could package both together. I struggle to see teams being more enthused with a deal that included Jimmy Garoppolo, but in you talking about the Panthers, if they do not select a quarterback, perhaps that changes for them.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the Houston Texans, you get Jimmy Garoppolo and Deebo Samuel. I think that's a team that might make the playoffs, just because of the division that they're in. I know the Colts are kind of the top dog, but I always felt last year like Houston would have been a better team if they had a decent quarterback and they needed some more playmakers on offense and you throw those two together in a package deal out there to you. I think that elevates Houston to right on the edge of a playoff contender.
Yeah, to me, it would, that would be nice to get it done in one. It wouldn't be nice because it would mean we're trading Dibo. And I'll be honest that regardless of what we get back, it is going to be a tough pill for me to swallow if Deebo Samuel is not a San Francisco 49er next year. It will be easier, slightly more palatable if we also get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo's salary in that deal and if we get a King's ransom in return as far as picks. That will make it moderately more palatable, but I'll still be crushed.
Oh, yeah. I think moving off of Deebo Samuel, I think it's just a big mistake for the 49ers. I think it's a bigger mistake than DeForest Buckner. It's just, how many of these guys are going to become all pros in your organization? You're going to move off of them and then have to replace them.
Homegrown.
The 49ers have done okay along the defensive line since they lost DeForest Buckner in that trade. They didn't, what they picked up in the trade for him hasn't really played in their favor yet, but they've been able to manage it. I think the wide receiver position could be a little bit different given the importance of that spot now in the NFL. So definitely a lot to think about and ponder as we head into this weekend and get ready for the draft next week.
No doubt. No doubt. Thankfully, we should have an answer this time next week. The drama is rich, but it's going to be short-lived.
Yeah, no, this next week's going to be a lot of fun. We have the draft to talk about. The Deebo Samuel stuff is still there. Is Jimmy going to get traded? Still plenty of 49er things to talk about, and it's going to be a good time. And as far as your channel, Rob, what have you got going on? You got anything coming up tonight or this weekend?
I put out a poll tonight asking people. I'm contemplating a Friday night call-in show. For the first time, a call-in show that is open to all. It will be voice only, not video. But it will be open to all. And right now, the poll is sitting at 69% in favor of Friday night. And so it is looking like I will be getting myself a call-in show going as soon as we wrap this.
Nice. That's really nice.
Yeah, I got to take a minute to finish updating my media and the thumbnail for the video. It'll take me a little bit to get it ready, but then it'll be a call-in show. So anybody watching right now that wants to talk about this Deebo drama that's going on, please bring those topics to my channel in just a little bit.
There you go. So make sure if you're not already subscribed to Rob's channel, which you probably are, but if you're not, make sure you go over there and get subscribed and get yourself all lined up to call in and you can actually talk to him and yell at him and tell him if he's right or wrong or whatever you want to tell him. But be nice. Rob's a nice guy.
I'm going to blame you for the first person that yells at me, Jack.
That's okay. It might be. I might just have to call you up. And
I was going to say it might be you. You might call in and just yell.
I might have to call up as like I don't know, Vic in Wisconsin. And I call up and start screaming at you. Anyway, but thanks, Rob, for doing this. I know we were going back and forth on the show tonight, so I really appreciate your flexibility with
always a pleasure.
And great to get the Hammerhead group together And thanks to everybody in the comment section. You guys were lively tonight, as for sure. If you're watching the show and you're not already subscribed, please subscribe before you leave. Hit that like button, hit the bell so that you can know when we're going live, like I said a little bit ago. And then also get yourself to 49ers.pressdemocrat.com for all the latest writing that I've done. Everybody, go out and have yourself a great weekend. Get over to Rob's channel for that call-in show in a little bit. Besides that, have a great weekend and take care.